right, welcome back to Expanding the Conversation with Richard and Kofi. Today, guys, we wanted to tackle maybe what might be considered a sensitive issue to many in Guyana. The issue, yes, of race. We've talked a lot about race before, and we thought that we would extend this conversation to different people because there's something about race that I don't think we have really settled on because to us, at least to me, race is such a complex issue, just generally, but more so in Guyana, it's a very complex issue, and I don't know that we've really found a good way to have a constructive and productive conversation about what race is, how it is used in Guyana. Are there different races? And how if there is a problem of race, how do we start to define and measure that problem, and then start to really talk about how we're going to solve it going forward? So I think these are big things that need to be discussed over time. And we're just going to expand our conversation about it. In no means this is going to be a full discussion of the issue of race in any possible way. What I will start off by saying, and I always tell Richard this, is I have to talk about things a little bit from a scientific background as well as before I even move into the social side of race. But genetically, there isn't a thing called race genetically. People aren't genetically different. Genes might be expressed differently. For example, you might have somebody tall, somebody who might be short, but we don't call those people different races of people. And skin color is one of those things also that is expressed differently, which is controlled essentially by the same gene. But over time, people have really gotten to a place where they feel like these differences between people are maybe sharp enough for them to be classified into a race. That may not be something that can be done on a scientific basis, but certainly on a social science, from a social perspective, I should say, I think people feel like they are maybe from a different race. So I think it could be a very personal thing to some people. Even though there might be skin color differences within group. So within even those who may consider themselves of African descent, there might be discussions about who's lighter skin versus who's darker skin, or even within the continent. The country of India, you can have folks who might be considered light skin versus dark skin. And are those people Indian? Are you of African origin, depending on your skin color? I think this is a really complex issue. And one of the things I find that people do, Richard, is if a black and white person, or an Indian in the Guyanese context, an Indian and Afro-Guyanese, or an Amerindian and an East Indian get into a quarrel, people are quick to say that's a race issue. I mean, instantly. I don't think that really should be the basis for determining whether there is a so-called race issue. Now, we still have to define the issue of race, but I may use it in the very colloquial context, the very basic context, is that people might look at two people arguing or having a fight and instantly conclude that that must be a racial issue. And one of the things that I think Walter Rodney, the great Guyanese scholar, one of the things I loved about the way he analyzed race, he said, look, the way to kind of test that is if you've got two black people arguing, if you have an Indian and a black person arguing, and somebody want to conclude it's race, if you replace those two people with the same race, two black men or two Indian men, if the issue remains, then it's likely not a race issue. So he at least provided a quick way for us to maybe sort of do some of these tests. And I think, unfortunately, he died prematurely. But I think that kind of analysis of race within our country is still very important, so that we can start to understand what is race and what is not race, so that we aren't intellectually lazy and sort of cast race as the reason for everything, every problem we have, because I think that makes it really difficult to solve the problem. Especially as I said before, it goes back to this issue of what is race, and what race do you belong to? I have dark skin, and so I'm from the continent. My ancestors are from the continent of Africa, but I have ancestors who are also from India. My father's grandmother was what someone may consider a pure Indian. And I don't have her DNA. I don't know if she's pure or not, and I don't know what that means. But pure Indian. And on my father's side, our family is quite mixed, right? My family is quite mixed, and so am I to say that I am only African, or can I claim anything to do with being Indian? If I were to do a genetic test and found out maybe my ancestors may have originated, let's say, from another continent, am I able to say that that's where my heritage goes? I mean, which one of those do you claim? I mean, how much of one group do you have to say that you are part of anything? Richard, I mean, I don't know what you are.
Yeah, no, that's this is a topic near and dear to me. We've talked about it before.
Right.
When you talk about who you are, there's some elements that were like I don't really care, and the reason why I say that is because as you rightfully laid out, right, like we've got this background that sort of genetically expresses itself a certain way,
Exactly.
but in no way, shape, or form is attached to who we are.
Exactly.
But even more, I think it's maybe understanding how you're made up and where you come from will make you feel somewhat attached to it. I've always felt like in Guyana we were so far removed from our heritage anyway, so a lot of it doesn't really matter that much, right? We have certain social practices that are reflective of our African heritage and our Indian heritage, but we've always sort of combined them together in some way, shape, or form. But when you talk about where I'm coming from, or where, like, what I understand my parents were, my grandparents were, my 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 father's father was Indian. My father's mother was Portuguese mixed with black with something else, and so I'm the product of my mother, my father. My mother's I think a little bit more Indian, and so here I am. I'm something. But in the context of this discussion around race in our country, and it's sort of like this one key base ingredient that we need in order to be successful as a people is to get past this separation issue that we have that isn't really a separation issue, right? And that's why I think we want to talk about is it really separating us, or is it something that we're using or other people are using as a front for what the real issue is? And if we can get past it and then we get to the real issue, then we can start really making progress as a people, right? To sort of live this rich life that we've sort of created for ourselves in Guyana with all kinds of different things, right? In a lot of ways, we can't imagine our Guyanese experience without curry or pepper pot or cocoa price, or right. And so, how do we remove that? How do we can't, right? We can't ever do that and feel like we're truly Guyanese. It doesn't matter what you are. But I think as we think about it too, right? Like, we don't realize how much if we stick to this separate thinking of Indians and blacks, there's a big group of people in between that are neither in the sense of the way they look, right?
Exactly.
And we all know they're beautiful people. So, what about them? What about their Guyanese?
Right.
element, and how do we get past that discussion? And so this is a conversation, I think, as I said to you, we're probably going to do a part 1 and a part 2 and a
Right.
part 3, because there's so much to kind of dig into and talk about openly, and start to really get to the issue of what are we facing. Is it racism, or is it something else, right?
Right.
And I think we've got a lot of something else that sort of masks itself as racism. That's not
Yes.
true, at least in my personal experience.
And Richard, I like that you alluded to sort of the diversity of people in Guyana in particular. We're not talking about Guyana now, that cross so many ethnic lines. And I think quite often the discussion has been hijacked maybe by two groups in particular. But Guyana has a wide array of people from, a range of ethnicities, traditionally known as the land of six people, right? Having had six people come to live in Guyana at specific time in history. And I think the history is important because our quest to understand the issue of race is linked to that history as to when different people sort of came to our country, and the fact that we had a colonial past. And so as part of that colonial past, you've got different groups, right, of people coming into the country from different parts of the world, coming in with specific cultures, maybe specific practices, and then having to find a way to live together, within the same country. You start to see these differences, and some of these people had never really met or dealt with each other before, ever, in their history. And so here they are, they're at completely different places in their lives. They're dealing with completely different issues. A lot of them poor people, right, sort of dropped on the continent and put to work. And so it isn't strange, I imagine, to see that whilst some of those people are going to begin to cross race lines, right? Some intermarry, some hanging out together, drinking at the bars, rum shop, and liming together, as we say, right? And working together. It's not unexpected to also see some of those people try to hold on to what they might consider their culture, and want to stick to that as well. And you brought up the real issue is it racism? Is it racist to feel like some of the history that was passed on to you as a group of people, that you would want to continue to hold on to that, right? And the other question becomes, how much should we hold on to when you're in this new space, right? I mean, language is one of the things that many of us lost, right? We started speaking English to the point where English is not even the first language now of so many people, because we now speak kind of a Creole. I tell people when I travel, right? I know what, bygone, right? And alu, and these things. And it's such a natural part of the language we speak, but I don't speak Hindi. Right? But you clearly see the insertion of sort of the Indian culture. You mentioned curries, right, and so on. But I play the drums. I mean, no one can tell me that I'm not African. I actually play a djembe drum, not remembering how I learned to play it, right? And so they're one of the things I love is that there are all of these inputs. I mean, do we really have to be forced to accept one particular culture? Right? Can we work collectively to start building something that ropes or brings in all of those sort of cultures, right, into one? But isn't it true that Guyana has, in many of its corners, right, in school, we went to school together, and you look
Yeah.
at how we interacted in school, and we sort of created this saints identity, and that says identity didn't have any color associated with it, right? It didn't have any color associated with it. When we played cricket, it didn't have, even when you look at West Indies cricket, there wasn't any, we just played cricket. You're just a cricket player, right? Can we really rise up to a level where we can create for ourselves a broader sense of integration, a broader sense of unity, that acknowledges all of the inputs into our lives, historic, the heritage that we all sort of bring to the table, but they don't define us to the point where we see ourselves as so different from each other. I mean, like you said, I mean, we talked about this many times before, where you talk about Diwali, right, and we talk about Emancipation Day, right, and all these different cultural holidays that we may have, right, that we tend to celebrate together, right? I mean, even religious holidays.
Yeah. No, you're spot on there. I think those are all things that it's sort of always, as you have these experiences, and I guess I'm thinking back now to like being in Guyana and
Right.
living there. I think there's sort of the attachment to what I am, right? As people talk about their culture as, in the Guyana context, or I'm either Indian or I'm either Black, and that's my culture. But when we leave Guyana, right, we recognize that and we start talking to people about what life in Guyana is like. We recognize that our culture is this beautiful blend of all kinds of things, right? I
Right.
tell people that, like we used to have everybody in the street playing park, going with up on another, and and we'll go celebrate Diwali. People go watch the motorcade or Emancipation Day. We'll all dress up in our African wear. We'll have sort of. I remember I went to this competition that was sort of like it was a thing at Everest, I think, where like you had to like mix and match different cultural clothes,
Mm.
And then you'd go and I think I ended up winning a prize because I'd mixed my Indian and my African wear so well. But when we talk about our culture to people that we meet outside of Guyana, we recognize that our Guyanese culture in itself is a unique culture, right? And it's a
Right.
beautiful mix of culture of
Exactly.
religious and racial tolerance and acceptance, and sort of this, we found a way to live so well together. And so for us now, as we talk about it, that's our culture, right? But then even and so, like, you're away from home and you meet somebody, you don't care whether they're Black or Indian, or whether they're Hindu or Christian or Muslim. You just happy that you meet a Guyanese person. I think that really
Right.
lends credence to the fact that what connects us is not any of those things that divides us back home, but the fact that we're from the same place and we share the same culture, right? We could talk about certain things. I remember being at the supermarket one time, and this lady, she was Guyanese, and she saw me buying plantains, and she was like, "Oh, you gonna need some plantains?" Like, that's not something that you see normal, especially green plantains. You don't see a lot of normal
Right.
buying it, right? And so that's our culture, right? And so I think back home, we sort of like, and you talk about like, these people sort of wanting to guard, to guard the where they come from and their
Right.
practices under this assumption this is our culture. But now we've
Right.
sort of taken all that and created something completely new that I'm pretty sure even if the Indians from India and the Africans from Africa came together, they would not recognize anything we do. So we're neither, but we're a beautiful blend of something that's special, right?
Right.
And I think if we recognize that, then we'd get past this whole issue of
Right.
race.
I want to make 2 points on what you just said. The first is, and I think I said it before, the sort of Indian African interaction tends to dominate the race discussion. But the native, we call the Amerindians, right,
Mm-hmm.
as they're calling Guyana, or let's call them the original people, right, in that part of the
Yeah.
world, are they contribute so much to the country, right? When you talk about Christmas and we talk about things like, I mean, we see it in our food, things like pepper pot and different things like that, right? But that's a whole group, I think, sometimes that don't even get a discussion forum, right, on
Yeah.
that issue. Um, Chinese, right? The Chinese, the Portuguese, right? These are groups oftentimes that don't really get the a part of the race discussion, right? And what that is in Guyana. If you look at Guyana, you think that there's really only blacks and Indians and nobody else matters. But as we've been saying in this discussion, yes, we have 6 original peoples, but you couldn't draw a straight so you couldn't draw a straight distinction or establish a straight distinction between our people because it flows, ebbs and flows between these different groups in terms of, who might be whom, right? Across one group to the other because of the intermarrying, because of the cultural experience, because of the foods we eat, because of all of these things, we have really, in a sense, become culturally indistinct, even though there might be other things that we practice that may still point out that, all right, that's predominantly African, that's predominantly Indian, that's predominantly, Amerindian, predominantly Chinese, and so forth. But the fact is, there's so much of our lives that are really indistinct, right, across this so-called ethnic or racial profile. I have a friend who's predominantly Amerindian, and she moved from Ghana to go live in upstate New York. And she went into Walmart, I believe, and a Hispanic person came up to her and started speaking Spanish to her. Right? Buenos dias, senorita, right? And he started talking, and she goes, I don't talk Spanish, I don't talk Spanish. And he goes,
Oh, bless
what? He says, wait. You mean your people didn't teach you any Spanish? She goes, no, I'm not from a Spanish country, I'm from Guyana. Right? And to me, that's interesting, right? Because when you look into Guyana, as you said, you could make judgments about people that could be completely off, right? That could be totally off. And like you said, people are really just from Guyana. The one thing I want to say here too, Rich, is it isn't though, I think we have to acknowledge that racism is real and it exists, right? And so there are people who judge other people based on the color of their skin or their ethnicity. And I think part of this discussion that we probably want to pick up on, maybe even in the second installment, is to really start to analyze, what racism is. And I think it starts with a definition, right? We're going to try to define race, but is everything racism, right? If as I said, if an Indian and black person or Amerindian and a Chinese person are having an argument, is that racist? Or if one or two people or a few people within a certain group, and I have to say this because it's how do you define what group people might be in after having a discussion about how fluid culture and ethnicity might be. And when you talk about skin color, how dark does a person have to be, or how different the texture of their hair has to be, when that's a continuum to say, well, you're in this group and you're in this group, right? Not to say that they aren't differences that you can see, but are we really to use those differences to separate our people, right? Is what I'm getting at. So if somebody says something stupid and racist, because it isn't that racist people don't exist, they exist, but do they really define the majority of Guyanese and the majority of people? I take the position that they don't. I think you can see, and you will always have people who will say things and act in a certain manner and hold prejudices, even if those prejudices may come from some place in the past, a place of hurt, or whatever the case might be, or some sort of supremacist thinking. I think at least the Guyanese I've interacted with, in large part, I have seen this general acceptance across the board that people are just people and we're just Guyanese. What's your experience been?
Yeah, no, that's, my experience is sort of reflective of where I lived in Ghana. But again, Ghana is not a big country. I've sort of been in many different parts.
Right.
I agree with you 100%. I think what probably brings us together more than anything is a line or a hangout, right? That's what we do.
Right.
We drink, we party, we dance, we celebrate together, right? And I think one of the things that we take for granted is that as a community and a culture and as a people, we are more advanced in this whole race integration thing than most places, right? And I say that and because I truly believe that we are, right? we're you know, a bunch of different people, and you know, we were talking about art earlier as a reference, but we've taken all these colors and we've made all sorts of colors in between, and we found a way to sort of celebrate life together and all that's good, right? I mean, we know for sure that everybody wants the same thing,
Right.
for themselves, for their kids, for the country. And I think maybe, as I heard you talking earlier and my thoughts are churning, I think one of the things maybe we don't talk enough about is how advanced we are as a people, with the exception of certain times in the year, like elections, right?
Yeah.
How advanced as a people we are based on how we live our lives and how integrated we are. I mean, we're one of the few places um, where we still have indigenous people, right?
Right.
And we're able to learn so much from them. I mean, Christmas is Christmas in many parts of the world, but Christmas in Ghana can't be Christmas without Tubberpot, right?
Oh yeah. Right.
Any house you go to, right? And so that's
Everybody.
something that's like that is real Guyanese. And so is that an Indian Guyanese or a black Guyanese or an Amber? No, it's a
No,
Guyanese
it's a Guyanese thing,
Christmas, right? um, and as my 5-year-old always sing, right? The song Guyanese thing is a Guyanese thing, and it is a Guyanese thing, right? And so I think maybe we ought to start celebrating as a people how advanced we are in this integration of
right.
race, right? I mean,
Exactly.
there are certain areas in the country that might be dominated by a few people, but I don't even know if that's true anymore, right? I mean, I think we've got a fairly widespread, with the exception of maybe again when it comes to politics, there's some polarization going on there. But for the most part, I think we've
Right.
got people everywhere doing great things that are incredible, right? So certainly, I mean, this is a conversation that
I,
needs many different parts. But I think my experience and you know, the relationship that I have with you and many other people at Saints is and in Guyana, across Guyana, is sort of a representation of my own experience with race, which is this. There's always been incredible love and support, and people that are cheering you on and willing to help you along the way. And to me, that is the peak of a great
yeah.
human experience.
And I'm going to add to that because there's something beautiful about that. Everything you talked about in terms of our ability to advance, which isn't often talked about, right? Because we talk a lot about the problems that we see,
Yeah,
but a lot of the things that you just described, a lot of the good, a lot of the integration that we've seen on the food front and the cultural front is they have occurred despite the challenges that we've experienced as a country. I can't think of. I mean, there are a lot of countries that have gone through trauma. I mean, Guyana's had a traumatic past, right? When you talk about colonialism and the trauma that colonialism has really induced and brought, and then the when we were going towards independence, our struggle for independence, and many people are aware of that, and even some of the challenges that we had in the 60s, which were stoked by overseas power and people who were concerned about their place in the world and power and so forth. We sort of suffered during those times, right? Sort of a casualty of the Cold War, as it were. And despite that, it's despite that we're still able to build from the bottom up this Guyanese identity, where you talk about you go anywhere in the world, and if you meet a Guyanese, you're excited. Oh, you're from Guyana? Yeah, man, I'm from Guyana. And you almost start to code switch because you want to get back to your Creolese, and yeah, and you just get into it, right? And that again, that's despite the things that we've gone through. So I mean, it's sort of bringing this down, right? It's despite everything that we've gone through, we're still able to hold together this rich, unique Guyanese identity. We still got places to go. Of course, the biggest issue where we see divisions sort of coming up is around the time of politics. And I think politics is a beast by itself because if you go back to the beginning of this conversation where I said the issue of race is complex, it's got a history to it, right? It's got a lot of ingredients thrown in there. The politics is just as complex, right? Because when you start talking about people coming into a colonized state and living in a particular area, having their own culture, maybe getting involved in specific economic activity, and then you get a politics that starts to build around that, immediately an outsider coming in might look and say, "Hey, this is a race issue," without really appreciating and understanding what the history there is. Now, have we had what some may consider race wars? Yeah, there are times where people have been stoked against each other for political reasons and otherwise. But we've got to find a way to separate those kinds of battles and challenges away from some of the other struggles for equality, right? And economic upliftment and just a better quality of life, and realize that regardless of the color of people's skin, I believe everybody wants the same thing for their family, right? Everybody wants the same for their children. They want their children to be educated. And if that means that the best teacher in town has the darkest skin or the lightest skin, nobody cares, right? You're sending your children to school. When we went to school, we didn't pick what teachers, were the best or not the best based on the color of their skin. Teachers were just teachers, and if they were good, you enjoyed it, and if they weren't, right, it wasn't a good experience. So I think we've got to spend some time talking about how we separate those real political, economic issues that may have some bearing on race, but others that don't, where these are just basic human beings fighting for their place, in the state, in the country, in the economy, and be able to talk about how do we have a conversation to really work together on the things that we really agree on, and start finding solutions for dealing with other areas where we feel like there might be discrimination, or there might be somebody, favoring one particular group over another.
Yeah, there's all great points. This is a long discussion, so I think we'll save some of it for part two. But I think I like being able to talk about it, because I think one of the things that I think we're fortunate to live, right, as two people from different parts of Guyana with sort of different external ethnic backgrounds. We live this life that's very different, right? So I feel like I've always believed that it's conversations like these that are gonna sort of change the focus, right? And so I think let's continue having it. It's a big topic to narrow down into a small time, but
All right.
this has been good. We'll save the rest for part two, and
Let's do that.
get a little bit more information as we talk about it. But yeah, definitely a great topic to keep delving into.
All right, man. Expand the
All right.
conversation.
Expand the conversation.